In this video, I'm going to run through some of the dark arts, the black magic that is timeline recalculation within Workfront. So under the Setup Project Preferences, there's a section that shows project timelines will be automatically recalculated every night and when a project scope changes. Those are very common to have turned on and I think are a good idea, but they don't necessarily act the way you might think they do. Similarly, for most projects, the right thing to put for the update type, which is in the middle of the screen there, is automatic and on change. So as your plans change and your task durations and your plan start and end dates change, that particular setting will ensure that the timeline of that project is recalculated. But as you'll see shortly, it doesn't necessarily transmit its way through to the rest of the system. The next few slides show some examples of this behavior. Projects A, B, and C are connected with cross-project predecessors, A to B to C. As A gets extended, the automatic recalculate timeline affects the end date of that project A, but it does not impact project B. You can see that it's still left where it was. Once B is recalculated, it moves out correctly, but in turn, C is not affected until C is recalculated, and at last, everything is in the correct position. Similarly, by shortening A, B and C do not automatically move back unless they are recalculated. Here's a similar idea that's a little more complicated with projects A to B to C to D to E and AA to BB to CC to DD to EE, and E also impacts EE. As before, if A and AA move out, B and BB do not move out. However, by selecting all of the tasks that are affected and recalculating them all in a single recalc, the correct results are then brought back. So for tonight's experiment on timelines, we've got this as the current, or this was the current state of this data. All of these were cascading and made sense from a timeline perspective. I've just increased that second task right here to be considerably longer, but I'm intentionally not going to recalculate timelines because I want to see what happens overnight, whether it will push everything through the cross-product predecessor that's here. In other words, this one will move out, but I'm curious to see whether any of the other subsequent ones afterwards will follow. I will pause recording so you can place your bets anonymously. After waiting one night, there was no change. Second night, same thing, still no change. Presumably, timelines were recalculating, but not in an order that affected the result. On the third day, they then changed and kind of caught up, which was interesting, but disappointing. Around this same time, one of our clients reported an unfortunate situation. The master project they used, which was being fed by several sub-projects, had been prepared in a presentation for their executives, but unfortunately, the children projects that fed into the master had some changes that weren't reflected in that presentation, and it was discovered too late. So they had to cancel the meeting and restart again once they'd let the timelines catch up. So within Workfront, there is a System Admin button for Recalculate Timelines underneath System Diagnostics. However, granting sysadmin just for the sake of recalculating timelines is likely a bridge too far for most companies. Who should have rights and responsibilities for updating timelines anyway? Surely the project manager, but when the project manager's projects are feeding into a master project of some sort, perhaps it makes more sense for anyone who has managed rights to call for a calculation to be done on those feeder projects. Similarly, there could be situations where you don't want to recalculate timelines, and certainly when a project is on hold, it doesn't really make sense to recalculate timelines either. So that led us to make some enhancements to our existing Recalc Helper around timelines, which I'll show you now. Our first improvement was to add a new custom data field called Recalc Helper Timelines, which is a drop-down on any custom form that you would like to use this functionality. The trick is to put it in a Recalc Helper Settings section, which, as you can see on the left, is only visible to those with edit rights to the project. Within that special section, the Recalc Helper Timelines dropdown then has three selections: anyone with edit rights, project owner only, or skip recalc timeline. And you can rename the labels as you see fit. With that custom data in hand, you can then create a view that references it in an editable fashion and even colorizes it as we've done in this example. And if you use that view on a report, you can then drop that report onto a dashboard along with our AdApp Recalc Helper for project timelines, the latter of which is just an external page on the dashboard that points to our functionality. So with a dashboard set up, the logged in user, Paul PM, will be able to recalculate timelines on the first row because Paul is the project owner, and the third row because Paul has edit rights and it's been marked as such. But the other ones will not recalculate because they're either owned by AdApp Demo or they are visible from a view perspective but not editable by Paul, or the dropdown has said to skip that particular project even if Paul owns it, or if the project is actually on hold with the built-in ONH code. Now down to the bottom of the dashboard for the helper itself. There's an orange button that says how many beside it and a filter that can be defaulted as part of the config, in this case to the Blackmagic projects that are at the top of the dashboard. The filter is applied and the count is returned. Once the end user then clicks the Timelines button, the app consults the Recalc Helper Timelines custom data to decide what to do with those found. In this case, there were 3 items recalculated, 1 excluded because it was on hold, 1 excluded because the PM who was logged in does not have edit rights to that project at all, 1 excluded because they weren't the project owner, even though they had edit rights to the project, and 1 was excluded because that project was explicitly marked as skip recalc. Each of the orange results is a hyperlink that will take the logged in user directly to those projects. To prove that it did what it should, by changing the grouping on the report at the top back to nothing, it will then cause that report to refresh. And when the refresh dates come back, the 3 rows that should have been recalculated at 7:41 p.m. were indeed recalculated. Now that you understand better how timelines can be recalculated and some of the subtleties as to who and when ought to make those changes, I invite you to consider our Recalc Helper solution.